I've been watching some of your transdimensional mapping that you've been doing, and
Yeah,
it's really cool. The thing I like about it is you obviously this is a process. You take your time and
right.
you stick to the protocols, but it's fascinating. So when you're doing that and you
Yeah.
are in this state of just letting things come very slowly, do you ever have moments where you're like, I got to stop? It's not something I'm coloring too much, or do you ever have moments like that?
Yeah, every once in a while, I just don't feel a deep connection, or I have something else on my mind, or my dog starts going crazy and barking, and I have to deal with him. Sometimes it's just difficult subject matter if you're looking at something that's negative in some way, or like a war scene, if you're looking like at a World War II battle. Things like that can be upsetting. And whenever that happens, I'll just either take a break and walk away from it and come back to it later, or I'll just stop and never come back to it. But honestly, that doesn't happen very often. I've been doing this for 30 years, so I've seen it all.
Yeah, you probably have gotten to a point where if emotions start coming, you can roll through it, I bet.
Exactly. Yeah. But
Yeah.
I do get emotional sometimes on some sessions. Things that are very beautiful and loving, or things that are very deeply sad. I'll
Mm.
cry from time
Yeah,
to
I'm sure.
time.
That kinda leads me into one of the first things I wanted to talk about, which is the Psionics Summit. I
Yes.
attended that. That was really awesome. Did Ubiquity host that, or was that ch
Yes, Ubiquity hosted it along with my company, Transdimensional Mapping. We did it together. And it was a wonderful event, truly wonderful. We had so many incredible people in attend that were panelists and that offered their perspectives on psionics, what that means to them, and what they think it might mean about connection and contacting with non-human intelligence. So it was a fascinating conversation.
It was utterly fascinating. I mean, you had some great people there, like you just said. Jake Barber stopped by and added what he's learned about psionics and how they use this in his work in
Right.
Skywatchers, and I definitely wanna talk about that. And I think you had David Clements on there too, is that correct?
Yes, David Clements. That's
He
right.
is a very interesting individual here in this conversation. He's somebody that did not come into this that he was a hardcore physicist, is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. And
But then
then
he
he
started making connections and figuring things out, and he's brilliant. He's brilliant, absolutely. And people were so excited to listen to him. A lot of
yeah.
comp
Yeah, he very interesting, to hear his take on these. I'd love to get him on the podcast eventually. I don't know if Lisa Nelson, I know she was in attendance there, but she was quite impressed with him, and she went through, I think, the process of I think there's a psionics questionnaire you guys were doing, or
Yes.
somebody was doing. She went through that, but she
Yeah.
was very interested in David's work. Going back to Jake Barber and the Skywatcher crew and utilizing
Right.
psionics, I wanted to ask you a question. So, obviously, they feel very confident that they can provide this data of connecting with something that can materialize in front of them. Have you ever done anything like that? Have you ever connected with something and then actually visually saw it and brought it in, or is that a different sort of modality?
No, I have done that. My UFO group, ABQ UFOs, we have every month on the first Saturday, we do a CE5 meditation up in the foothills of the Sandia Mountains. And we've had a number of successes calling in herbs or things that look like they might be craft up there. And they'll respond. They'll respond to thoughts, come closer, move further, and you'll see them do what your mind is asking them to do. So we have had some success with that for sure.
Very interesting. Do you know of anybody that's actually brought one in to the point of, like, landing and you're physically observing it? Like,
I
in
do not. I do
okay.
not. To me, these things seem a little, especially doing something like a CE5 and you have lights in the sky. I'm not really sure if these are physical craft or if they're some kind of thought manifestation or interdimensional, or who knows what they really are. They're definitely not huge flying saucers coming in. But I know that Jake Barber and his crew, that they are planning, and they have said that they have called in craft that have landed and that they've been able to fly themselves using just the power of their own intuition and consciousness.
And that is where this conversation gets pretty real because
That's right.
lights far away and responding to your thoughts and dancing in the sky is one thing. But
Right.
if you're bringing something in that's physical and that's right there, now you're talking about a whole new ball of wax. This is up close and personal. And I guess that kind of bridges the gap here between what are people seeing and experiencing mentally versus what is coming into our purview, our dimension here. And that's where the
Exactly.
conversation starts to get real interesting. And we
Right.
have to wonder what exactly are we talking about here? Because there's several different conversations going on. There's the they're here and it's physical and it's just as physical as you and I, and that's a part of it. And then there's this other part of it, like the CE5 and the psionics conversation that's bringing something else in. Are you of the opinion that it's just several different things around us presently?
Yeah, I think it's many different things. Just from my own remote viewing sessions, I've looked at pretty much everything. I even did sessions on Jake Barber's experiences that I will
Really?
likely share, that I'll likely share soon because they're fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And it seems to me like I've remote viewed the Tic Tacs that Commander David Fravor saw,
Mhm.
and Jake Barber's egg, the
Right.
trash retrieval egg, and the New Jersey drones. Put those in quotation marks.
I wanna talk
Are
about that too.
Yeah, and they are all different. They all have a different feeling to me, a different kind of consciousness, a different way of interacting with me as a remote viewer. And
Mhm.
so to me, these are all different. I don't know if you can use the word species.
Mhm.
It's really, when it comes to something that's non human, we tend to anthropomorphize everything.
Correct.
We tend to look at it through our own human understanding and assign labels to it that may not actually be real to them.
Mm.
And so I'm always dancing around what these things are and what the importance of them are. Definitely seem to have a relationship with our planet and with
Mhm.
us, humanity, in some kind of way. But what that all means, it's still a big mystery.
Huge mystery, and that's I think a lot of people get confused about that because they want like you said, they anthropomorphize it, and they want it to
Right.
be one thing that they can wrap their head around, and I think when you start to look into these subjects, you start to realize that there's a lot of different things possibly
So,
happening here all at the same time,
exactly.
and,
Yeah, people want to stick it in. Okay, are they grays? Are they
right,
reptilians? Are they Pleiadians? And it's,
right.
yeah,
Could be
just
that
plain different.
right, it could be that and more. Yeah, and so and that's what makes the New Jersey drone conversation people are calling it the New Jersey drone thing, but it's global.
It's global. Yeah, it's in many different states and across the world in many different places. And this has been going on for many years. Didn't start this past November.
Right, it's not
These
new.
incursions. Yeah, it's not new.
It's not new. And I don't know if you saw the 60 Minutes
Yeah.
interview with Bill Whitaker. He interviewed, I think,
Yes.
3 four-star generals and a
Right.
member of Congress and a Biden White House administrator, and they were just like, "We don't know what this is." And I just
Right.
if it's something traditional, I find that hard to believe, and the reason I say that is because I've looked at some of the satellite systems, like the Lockheed SBIR system.
Right.
They're mapping the planet constantly, and they should be able to
Yes.
zoom in. I'm pretty sure they could zoom in and watch Tiger Woods putt on the green somewhere in the
There's
world.
no question. There's no question. They can see the face on a penny from Lord knows how many miles up. So they definitely are watching and collecting this data.
Mhm.
And I think really trying to figure it out, or perhaps hoping it's just going to stop and go away, but it hasn't stopped. They're still seeing the drones in New Jersey and other places. They're seeing them probably right this moment. It's dark out there.
And this also gets into an interesting aspect of it because the people are seeing large quadcopters. And
Right.
there's 2 ways to think about this, I think. You could say, okay, so the US is deploying or somebody's deploying large commercially sized state-sponsored drones, or it has been purported that the phenomenon can use mimicry to
Yes,
look like things. And so what
that's
people
right.
that's the Cash Landrum case is a good
Yes,
example of that, and Edgar Mitchell documented this in his archive, and so it gets confusing because
it does.
what are people seeing?
Exactly, exactly. And people have even reported with these drones, literally seeing them morph from one shape into another. All of a sudden, grow more lights or wings, or shift from a particular mimic type of drone to another type of drone, or from a drone to a helicopter. There's been all kinds of interesting accounts out there.
Yeah, all kinds of wild things going on. So in your transdimensional mapping, and when you're looking at the New Jersey drone things, are you seeing multiple different types of things, or have you come to some sort of a conclusion?
Yeah, first session that I did on this, and all these sessions I have done blind, meaning I don't know what it is that I am looking at. Somebody has given me something to look at, and all they give me is a string of random numbers to start with. I have no idea. It could be the Taj Mahal or Disneyland or the president's inauguration or anything. And I started and I got these things in the sky and these lights in the sky. I also got military craft, clear military craft in the sky, military drone, unmanned aircraft of some sort, and helicopter. And those were very much felt human to me. The helicopter had human pilot, and I connected with his experience, and he was
Mm,
freaked out by what he was looking at in the sky. But there were
mhm,
multiple, these weird pinpoints of light, and I could see them shifting into different shapes, but the shapes weren't real. It was a manifestation. They were able to build out this skin around them, this shape around them
mm,
using it was a consciousness thing. It definitely felt like consciousness, but the real presence was the tiniest speck, something on the quantum level perhaps, or
mm,
even smaller than that, something we cannot measure. That was what these things are, and they're sentient. And
mhm,
there's a lot of them, a lot of them. It was pretty fascinating. They seem to be collecting data. They're interested in what we're doing, and they seem to be actually concerned about us. Not necessarily us as a species individually, but more in how everything on this planet, they seem to be concerned about the planet, and they see us as arising from the planet. Not that we're separate individuals or a separate species, human beings, but that we are literally a part of this planet, a defective part, if you will. That's creating a lot of issues.
and in this,
Yeah.
and I know you guys had Chris Bledsoe there,
Yes.
and he's a very fascinating character in the UFO conversation. He's seeing these orbs every day almost. He puts videos up every day that it's very difficult to explain what he's looking at,
Right.
but there's probably a connection there between all of this and what he sees.
Absolutely.
And then I find it interesting. We get this news in the last 24, 48 hours about these structures under the Great Pyramid.
Oh my gosh.
And he's talking about 2026 when the star of Regulus is over the Sphinx, that there's going to be an awakening or a returning of something.
Right.
And I've met many people that have studied that area quite extensively. And we know there is an anomaly. There's a void under I think it's the left or right forepaw of the Sphinx. And like I said, in the last 48 hours now, they've done this. I don't even know how to say it. But there's some sort of ground penetrating sonar to
Right.
acknowledge structures there. Are we on the verge of this understanding, maybe another little leap forward in our understanding of what we are and why we're here?
I think we are. I really think we are. And there seems to be a mass awakening occurring. If you just look at the general population, prior to 2017, not that many people had very much knowledge about the UFO phenomenon, except for those of us who have been into it forever.
Right.
Those of us obsessed, I'll say. But the
Right.
general public really didn't have an understanding or even an idea of all of the different kinds of possibilities. But then with this kind of disclosure, this slow disclosure rollout, more and more people are becoming interested. And I can see this in my own UFO group here in New Mexico. We started with a handful of people. Now we have literally a few thousand people in our group.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's all because of everything that's been rolling out, what's been happening in Congress, mainstream media that have been covering the congressional hearings or that have covered the drone sightings, the Tic Tac events, things like that. And now people are looking at all of these different kinds of connections out there, and they're starting to see and they're starting to wonder. I have people in my own life who were very skeptical, even though they love me. They're just been
Mm,
skeptical about all this stuff. But now they're wondering, is there something to this 2026 or 2027? These years have been floating out there from various people. You have Chris Bledsoe, but others have mentioned other years as potential. And it's all within the same kind of 5-year period. And
right.
what's really interesting to me is 25 years ago, I had done this big project with my group at the time on disclosure because I thought at that time disclosure was right around the corner.
Right.
Wishful thinking. And then
Mm,
the resulting remote viewing data indicated that it wasn't around the corner. It was going to be in the future. And the kind of timeline that we developed seemed to suggest it was around 25 to 30 years in the future that some big event was going to happen, something that was going to change everything, almost like an open contact event. We
mhm.
called it the big event. We called it the flotilla because this remote viewers were drawing big saucers floating in, but I think that could be a metaphorical for a big, huge awakening change. And I feel that's what's happening right now. And we're at a crossroads. We're at a crossroads. We're to figure out who we are and what we want to be. We're giving over so much of our lives to technology. Artificial intelligence is becoming a prominent player in the scene right now. We have a huge divergence of opinion in the political sphere, and at least here in the United States, the country's extraordinarily divided. People are on one side or the other. They're not able to meet and have fruitful conversation right now. There's a lot of anger and upsetness. People are
Except for
struggling.
this topic.
Except for this topic, it's bringing people together. This is what gives me hope, quite honestly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had this thought. I had the opportunity to meet Lou Elizondo about a week and a half ago. He came to where I was and he did his speaking engagement. And
Right.
I myself and a friend of mine did the dinner thing with him before. So we had a small group and I got the opportunity to look at him in the eyes and have ask him questions. I treated it as an interview. And my sense was that I think he is still very much a cleared individual within the government and the DIA, but I also think there's these think tanks, private and official, that are really seriously pushing this information. Why else would he be out there
Yes.
quitting his job, touring the country to do this? You could say he's trying to make money, but he probably has sacrificed more money by leaving his job, you know.
And when he first came on the scene, he spent a couple of years going on every UFO podcast that existed at the
Mhm.
time anyway. Most days he was on at least one podcast, some days two or three. And I kept a Google Doc of every appearance because I was fascinated just watching this, thinking, what is he up to? What's actually going on here? This is not the kind of normal behavior you would expect for someone who's coming out and wanting to share some information. This seemed an agenda of some sort. And I've come to really believe that he is part of a controlled disclosure movement. And I think a number of other people in that same sphere are as well. I think that it's a benevolent operation, but an operation nonetheless.
Yeah, I agree. I think that he also has this overwhelming sense of patriotism. His
Yeah,
father was a Cuban person that came over here and defected from Castro, and I think it's in his DNA that when he came to the United States, it was instilled in him that this is a pretty special place, and I think
right.
that emanates from him, and
Yes,
when I got a chance to sit down with him and converse with him, he is very nice. He was so polite, and I had this sense that he is on a mission personally, but
right,
also a controlled sort of situation where I'm betting they have a 10 to 15-year plan with
right.
things that, like, if things go wrong here, like, him and a think tank as well as official cleared people within the government, I think they have this kind of mapped out, is my
Think
sense.
I 100% think this as well. I've thought this for some years now that they do have a slow rollout and they're meeting their metrics along the way and having to deal with whatever fluctuations on the fly. But I think that everything that they've been doing is to a particular end.
Hmm.
And they started with the national security narrative,
Hmm.
because it's a way to get members of Congress interested and those who are perhaps afraid of this topic to consider it.
Hmm.
And yeah, and now it's morphing into this discussion around consciousness, which is super
Uh-huh.
interesting to me.
It's very interesting that kind of got rolled out. And I'm sure
Right.
they're partnering with some of the bigger platforms out there, like the Ross Coultharts and
Absolutely.
to roll out this information so that people can digest it. The people in the UFO community, they've heard about this for decades and they're
Exactly.
impatient, right? Because they're
That's
hearing all
right.
this. And for them, it's just confirming what they already know. But for
Right.
the new people coming in, that's a lot.
It's a huge amount. It's one thing to say that a Navy pilot saw a strange, unidentifiable object that seemed to move in strange ways, to, hey, we can call them in with the power of our minds and have conversations with them.
Right.
It's a big leap. It's a big leap for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I've had conversations with people that don't follow this, and
Right.
they don't believe that aspect of it, and so that's
Absolutely.
yeah, and if that's any temperature to where the general population is, I think now if you ask them, "Hey, do you think the government's retrieved craft and have engineered it?" I think most of them would say, "Yeah, sure, believe that." And
Right.
then this consciousness conversation is now coming out that is trying to be absorbed, and the Telepathy Tapes podcast, I think, is doing a lot of the heavy lifting there.
Absolutely,
Um,
absolutely. That's been phenomenal. I was on the edge of my seat listening to that, but it has opened this whole idea of consciousness and the idea that we are telepathic beings, or beings that are simply not just a mind and a body. We are a mind beyond the body. And yeah, it's wonderful how this
yeah, and
conversation is progressing.
yeah, and I go back and forth with this whole thing. Is this because, for example, like you remote viewed when disclosure would happen, and then you
Right,
slowly start to see pieces fall into place as time goes on. And it's
right.
almost like it was written to be this way. There is a control that's beyond just a governmental control that pushes things and nudges things in a certain direction. Um,
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that completely. But I also think that what's happening today with this slow rollout of disclosure, I think that this was orchestrated many years ago. And I do believe that they have a date. I do believe that the reason that they're doing it isn't simply for the good of humanity,
mm,
just because we have a right to know.
right.
But I believe that the real reason that this is happening is because they have to do it. They have to do it because they know about something that's going to happen, and they have to get the people on board before it does. I truly believe this deep inside, that it's the only thing that makes sense. Otherwise, why would Chuck Schumer co-author the UAP disclosure bill, or all of these people that have gotten involved, people at the highest levels of government, the highest levels of industry, the highest levels of the military? They're all working on this together in conjunction. And it's just so fascinating to me because 20 years ago, it was so easy to keep everything covered up. And it's not like anything has changed per se, but all of a sudden, everyone's on board and they're moving in a direction. So I believe it's for a specific purpose. There's something's going to happen.
It certainly feels that way. I agree with you. There's no reason for them to disclose anything unless
Right.
the only other reason I thought would be is if they really thought there was like rogue factions of government or companies, which I'm sure there is a little bit of that going on.
Right.
There's some
Right.
illegalities, people pushing the envelope, but other than that, like that could be handled behind closed doors.
Yes, it could be.
To make a public to make a public political theater out of all this, there's a reason for that because they want people to know.
Right.
And there's like you said, there's probably a reason for that, which might bring me into my next question. I wanted to ask, this is a wild one, and I don't know if you've done this or not, and I'm sure you've heard about Planet X or
Oh,
Nibiru.
sure.
Okay. Have you remote viewed this? Do you know of any information about this?
Yeah, I remote viewed it a long time ago, back when I was at Farsight Institute, and we got something. The data was a little convoluted back then. People were very new to remote viewing. I haven't looked at anything like that recently, but I don't get the sense that's what is happening right now. I have been getting ideas that I'm seeing in my session and in others' work that the sun is involved in some way. We are reaching, or we're in the middle of the solar maximum part of the cycle. And that's one of the things that the non-human intelligence that we call the drones was super interested in the sun's activity in some way. It could be that we're headed towards something like a major solar flare, Carrington event type thing, or even a micronova, something destructive like that'll take out a big portion of humanity. I think these things are possibilities, things that could be on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's what the interest is with all these different species that seem to be visiting us at the moment or here and making themselves known in some way. It seems like they want to see how we handle whatever is being thrown at us right now.
Yeah, and the sightings don't seem to be slowing down. The interactions don't seem to be slowing
No,
down. The interest doesn't seem to be slowing down.
no.
And yeah, I have this. I'm sure you're aware of this. I'm it's almost guaranteed that there's going to be more whistleblowers parading forward here.
Oh, I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it. We had David Grush and Jake Barber, and they're opening doors for other people to step forward. David Grush was attacked in
Oh
his,
yes.
it's just awful. It's awful how you could put someone's mental health on display like that. It's just completely 100% wrong to do that. We should be a kind people. But now we have Jake Barber, and he hasn't gone through the ringer. Hopefully, he will not. But it might be that David Grush opened the door wide enough so that others are able to start stepping through.
Yeah,
I'm
the
very
first one through the
hopeful
door
about
is
that.
always
It's
beaten up.
always the hardest, right?
Yeah, and one of the it was terrible that his medical records were leaked, but everybody was on that like white on rice as soon as that happened,
Mhm.
and all the Ross Coultharts of the world,
Right.
they were quick to shoot that down and say,
That's right.
this is obvious what this is. It's
That's right.
and it was great to see people do that, to call that out for what it was,
Ye
because that's some entity behind the scenes leaked that information and got that out there on purpose. It wasn't,
That's right.
um
And what's amazing, what you just said is amazing because 20, 30 years ago, if someone had stepped out as a whistleblower and then things from their past were put on display or mischaracterized or what have you, they wouldn't have had this overwhelming support, not in the way David Grush has had. Things have changed for the better. For those who have had experiences, who are in this field, it's pretty interesting just seeing that shift right there.
yeah, I've had conversations with people that have been in this field like yourself for decades. I found this topic in 2005, wrestled with it for a few years,
Yeah,
but there are people out there that have been investigating cases since the '80s and the
right,
'70s, the
right.
Don Schmitz of the world.
Oh, Don Schmidt, he's great.
Yeah, and when I've
Yeah.
talked to him, and these the type of questions I ask these people is, "What was this like the '80s and the '90s and the 2000s, and then what is it like now?" And they're shocked. They're shocked
Yeah,
by where the conversation is right now. They're like, they never
exactly.
thought there would be a hearing, and it's fascinating to hear their perspective on this with that kind of timing.
It
Um,
is, and I think another reason that things are so different now is the speed of information. Back in the 80s, because I was really into this back in the 80s, it was you had to sign up, send in an actual piece of paper and put a stamp on an envelope and subscribe to somebody's crazy UFO newsletter. And then you'd get these mimeograph sheets in the mail once a month, say, and you'd be so excited when it would come and it would have to be enough to hold you over for another month. You had to save up your money and go to conferences to get information. There was no internet.
it's
It wasn't anything like what we have today, but now the information, it's instantaneous. And so it's allowed all of this to spread into millions upon billions of people. And it's opened it up in a way that was impossible back then.
Yeah, completely impossible. And yeah, like you
Yeah.
said, it's completely instantaneous. I had
Mhm.
another question for you, and I don't know if you've ever
Yeah.
remote viewed this UFO event, and I know you've heard of it. Have you ever remote viewed the Rendlesham Forest from 1980 event?
Yes. Absolutely. Multiple times, in fact.
Okay, because I've been researching this one quite a bit. I've spoken to Jim Peniston a couple times,
Yes.
and he wrote a book in the last couple years with Gary Osborne called The Rendlesham
Right.
Enigma. I was wondering, could you give me do you remember that remote viewing session? Can you tell me what you think that was, or what information did you pull out of that one, if you can remember?
Yeah, I do remember. I remember all my sessions. I have a good memory for this. That was a really interesting session that I did. I didn't know what it was when I was doing it. I knew it was a UFO event because I got the
So this was
UFO
blind.
there. Yeah, this was blind. Yeah, almost everything I do is blind. The only thing that I do, what's called front loaded, meaning I know what it is ahead of time, is when I do police work, when I work on missing persons cases and things like that, because I'm contracting with law enforcement agencies and I know what the project is. So
Right.
it's just, it is what it is. But all this other stuff, I always do blind. I prefer it that way because then if you know what something is, then you're more likely not to make stuff up, but you're likely to miss things. You're likely to miss the unusual and unexpected things. But the Rendlesham Forest one was pretty interesting because I got that there were actually several ships that were buzzing that area. It wasn't just one ship, there were multiples. But there was some kind of they had, I'm just going to use Star Trek technology here, a cloaking device, for lack of a better word. They had a way to make
Mhm.
themselves invisible. So they
Mm.
weren't seeing, or they could have been shifting in and out of whatever reality or manipulating space and time. Who knows? But it was something like that.
Mm.
And, and one of those ships was in distress. There was something wrong going on with it.
Mm.
And I think that's the one that landed, was the one that had a problem of some sort. And that's why it landed where it
Mm.
did.
Mm.
And it did give a message. It definitely gave a message. The ship itself was sentient, which is pretty
Mhm.
interesting. And it didn't have a pilot. It was unmanned, but it was a man itself, right? It was a sentient object of some sort. But that a lot, like the Tic Tacs, there's nobody inside the Tic Tacs, and they're sentient.
Right. It's a craft, like a living craft, if you like.
It's a living craft. It has a consciousness, it has a sentience, it has an understanding of who it is and where it is and what it wants.
Mm.
It doesn't think like we do, doesn't have the same kind of linear thoughts like we do, or
Mm.
a sense of time like we do. One thing that I have noticed, and this has come up in multiple UFO cases, and this is true for the Rendlesham Forest case in addition, is that their sense of time is much broader than ours. We think of moments as being these little instantaneous split seconds in time. It's a moment right now, it's the next moment, and it goes in a line. But for the Rendlesham Forest UFOs, and this is also true for Tic Tacs, is that their now isn't a slim slice. Their now is extremely broad. So
Mm.
a moment to them might be an eon to us, or a year, or a decade, or who knows, but it's way broader than us. So they perceive all of that, ingest all of that in what we would call split seconds. So they can see for far into the future and far into the past all at once. It's one moment to them. And I always find that so interesting. And I wonder if it's a key to understanding time better for us to think about things a little differently.
Yeah, I've had that
Yeah.
conversation with multiple people that I think one of the themes of all these topics is that to shake us out of that linear thinking so that we can
Right, right,
perceive reality a little bit more
right.
broadly, like you're talking about, because that's probably more likely what's going on. Um,
Exactly. Yeah, we have a lot of blinders on, right? We're unable to see beyond just what's right in front of us. It's hard for us to take in more than that. But
yeah.
these creatures and objects, entities, whatever you want to call them, they can see it in its fullness.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I going back to disclosure for a second here.
Yeah.
This isn't my idea. This has been postulated for decades that maybe the first big step might be that they find microbial life on Mars, or they might find something on Mars, and that might be the first big step to open people's eyes. And then it might be that, okay, there was life there, intelligent life there, but it was a long time ago. So don't worry about it. And these are like baby steps, right?
I
I mean,
think that's likely. I think that's likely. And then maybe the next step is, oh, the James Webb Telescope has discovered that there's
right,
life on this way distant planet that's so far away we could never visit it and they could never visit us. But there's signs of some kind of organic life. And yeah, I think that's the plan, is that would match with the slow rollout. But what I'm really interested in is the wild cards in these scenarios, the wild cards. And I suspect we're going to see some of these where people are going to come out of the woodwork that no one is expecting to disrupt this nice slow disclosure. And then we may end up with the catastrophic disclosure as the
right,
as the saying goes. And I don't know which would be healthier, a slow, controlled disclosure where they're getting us in line to believe things in a certain pattern, or whether the apple cart is upset and we see things as they truly are. What's
right.
better?
Yeah, it's hard to say which would be better. Sometimes people don't like it when sometimes don't like it. Sometimes people don't like it when they lose their job. It's devastating,
Right,
but it
right.
opens up these other doors for
Exactly.
them. Or change is always uncomfortable,
It
you know.
is. You want to rip the band-aid off.
And yeah, so people will be upset for a little while, or we'll have to negotiate how they think for a little while, but then that'll settle in. And then that'll just be the new thing. People had to settle in when the nuclear bomb was invented and they did this, right? This is a new reality now.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
took a little while for people to get used to that, but now it's just
It's
this is part of reality.
It is. It's something we live with whether we want to or not.
There's like
Yeah.
these
There've
growing
been a
pains
lot
that
of discoveries like that throughout human history. The airplane or even the horseless carriage, all these things rapidly changed human existence, the computer age. Incredible how much humanity has changed in the past 100 years.
yeah.
It's
Yeah,
all and it's been under 200 years since humans even knew about dinosaurs. Isn't that
right, yeah,
crazy?
that's pretty wild. And I heard a
Right.
wild statistics, I think 100 years before we went to the moon, like, there was, like, the musket, and people
Right.
were riding around a horse and buggy, and then, 100 years later, they're on the moon.
Exactly, exactly.
You talk about, like, in one human lifetime, talk about throwing your whole reality and throwing a monkey wrench in your whole reality network. That's mind-boggling, and so I think this topic is gonna be one of those, and then
I do too. I do
yeah.
too. And I think we're going to have catastrophic disclosure. If I had to
Do you
put
think
money
that?
on it, I do think so. I am expecting a wild card. It's in my gut. I'm just really expecting something or somebody or who knows what. I think it's going to be on the human side. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a Phoenix Lights situation.
Right.
That's actually a good example because Phoenix Lights that happened in '93, and thousands of people in Arizona saw this enormous triangular craft just float on by, including the governor of Arizona and Kirk Russell, the actor who was flying an airplane and happened to see
Kurt
it.
Russell.
Kurt Russell, yeah.
Yeah.
And so then and that happened in '93. That was before everybody had cell phones
Mhm.
and cameras attached to their phones and in their pockets. And if we had a Phoenix Light scenario today over a highly populated area, that would be catastrophic disclosure today.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, that's a possibility, but I think it's going to happen on the human side. Someone's going to come out with something irrefutable. What that is, I do not know.
Mm.
That would be my guess.
Didn't I always find it interesting that Hayam Eshed said that
Yeah,
at the end of his
right.
career. He said some explosive things.
Oh my gosh, the Galactic Federation and everything.
Yeah, he went hard in the paint there, and he
He
said that Donald
did.
Trump knows about it and that this is a real
Right.
thing. And when somebody of his stature, and just for the audience sake, Hayam Eshed was the father of the Israeli space program, and he comes out and he says that extraterrestrials are real, there's a Galactic Federation of Earth and that Donald Trump knows about this. That's shocking.
It's
And
hugely shocking. It's
yeah,
hugely shocking, and it didn't get a lot of press attention whatsoever, which is fascinating considering his stature,
hmm.
his background. But it's a great story, and what's interesting is I literally gave all of his allegations to a group of my transdimensional mappers, my remote viewers, and so my team has actually been working on that to see what is true in his story, so I'll be
And
able to present something on that soon.
okay, all right. So you're currently working on that.
They finished it and now we're gonna have a meeting to do some analysis and look at everyone's work and correlate the data and see what we have.
Right. That always sounds so wild to think that there would be some sort of group that would come together to talk about where this is all going. But
Right.
if you accept the fact that UFOs are real and that you accept the fact
Sure.
that there's non-human intelligences,
Yeah.
some of them probably have agendas.
And alliances, and they probably know each other, especially if they're way more advanced than we are and they're already blipping in and out of our solar system or in and out of our dimension. I'm sure that there's alliances and maybe there's some that don't like each other. All of that makes sense to me. I can't imagine that they would be working without knowledge of the other species.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense too. Just
Yeah.
because they're more advanced doesn't mean they're not aware of each
Right.
other. And if they're here and if you have some things that are as physical as you and me and have needs and have agendas, there may be times when their agendas conflict. And so you have to have
Exactly.
some sort of working agreement that if you're going to both coexist in a place, that you have conversations or at least communications about what you're both doing. And
Right.
so that could easily snowball into what somebody would call a galactic federation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And maybe there is a galactic federation. I know what's interesting to me is I've looked at all kinds of things and I've never actually come across a galactic federation. I have come across alliances between particular species or entities or everyone, whatever you want to call them. Everyone uses the word species, but that just seems so wrong to use. These are sentient beings that are way smarter than we are, and their technology is thousands, if not millions of years ahead of us. Species just feels a little
Yeah, it feels like
derogatory in
us.
some way, doesn't it?
Yeah, it feels like us putting an animal in a zoo sort of a thing.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
But that's how we talk about all of this. And I think that it's a way to make us feel a little more comfortable with the topic. If you can put it in that kind of a box, then it becomes more like a scientific specimen instead of this overwhelming presence or possibility.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the Dan Burrish story?
Which one's that?
Dan Burrish, I think he was a microbiologist and he claimed to have worked on an unacknowledged program where he had to go through certain protocol. You know what
Right.
I'm talking about? So I'm
Yes.
assuming you've never remote viewed his.
I have not looked at his
Okay.
story. Yeah.
He's got a very interesting
Yeah.
story.
His
And
story is super interesting.
yeah, and a lot of people call BS on his story, but I don't know why he would say those things. And it does appear that somebody has tried to discredit him for sure, or some entity at
Right.
least has gone to great lengths to try and discredit him. These aren't like just people within the UFO community trying to knock him down, although I'm sure that's
Oh,
happened. It seems like there's
yeah.
been a more official campaign to do that.
Yeah, it's always surprising to me. I've looked at a lot of things through remote viewing, a lot of controversial UFO stories, a lot of stories that most people I'll say, or a large proportion in the UFO community think are false stories in some way. And what's interesting to me is a lot of these stories end up, I believe, are real. But because they're so unusual and so unexpected that people have a hard time coming over that hurdle. But we're talking about non-human intelligence. We're talking about beings that are flying in craft, create craft that seem to have no propulsion system. So why would something like a galactic federation or why would that otherwise be that
Off the
unusual?
table.
Right? Off the table. Exactly.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
always that's always the thing
Yeah.
for me. I'm like, guys, what are we talking about here? if you can get over that hurdle that there's probably intelligent life in the universe, it's probably pervasive.
Exactly. And it's probably pretty crazy in all kinds of different ways and so different than us. And so, why aren't these possibilities? Why do we have to fit it into established boxes? It always makes me uncomfortable when people do that. That's the anthropomorphizing that
Yeah.
we can't help. We can't help but do. We try to. We think about the gray aliens. The most famous aliens are the gray aliens. They're the
Right.
face of the abduction phenomenon. And
Right.
people, they talk about them like they're humans in gray suits. Generally, people do. They talk about what's their hierarchy, who's in charge. They must be doing medical experiments. Maybe it has nothing to do with
Yeah.
medicine.
Must they be?
Right, exactly. So we're making all of these assumptions. And I think that most of our assumptions are flat out dead wrong in all of this. In all of this, I think that the reality is something completely sideways from how we've framed this entire discussion.
But maybe that framing is just necessary to get us going.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And it's a comfort thing too. It's a security blanket if you can identify with a non human being of some sort, another person. I like to call them people, honestly. If a person from not from this planet or not a Homo sapien, if you can look at them and think that they might be like you in many ways, then that makes them more approachable too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe we'll get to this point where there'll be a big reveal and that'll help bring people together a little bit more.
Exactly.
I think that's one of the positive things of disclosure, if you want to
Right.
call it that, this new reality that people will be aware of. And yeah, I don't I go back and forth with whether it's going to be catastrophic or a slow release, but
It could go either way, but I feel it's gonna be catastrophic, but I might be wrong on that. I haven't looked at that, but that's on my definitely in the list of things to at least give out to some of my group, or hopefully
so this
somebody
is
will
your
give that to
sense.
me to look at.
This is just your sense based on the
Yeah,
conversation.
it is. It's just my sense, just how I can see things in my mind's eye, how I can look back to 2017 and see this slow rollout, the Elizondo and Chris Mellon and, all of these characters, one by one coming forward, working together, pushing,
Mhm.
talking about, oh, we're getting pushed back. But then they take a couple more steps forward. It's a clear operation.
Right.
But there have been some small wild cardish things, and I just have a feeling that now that more whistleblowers have come forward, you could get somebody from way left field. Another possibility, too, and this could be a real possibility, is that another country out there could step forward, could have in the work say, you know what, we're going to scoop the United States, might be China, somebody else. It would have to be a large, it couldn't be a really small country somewhere that doesn't have a lot of political clout in the geopolitical sphere. It would have to be a larger country like China, Russia. Russia seems to be just too wrapped up in everything going on. They have a lot on their plate right now. I really don't think that they're up for this. Putin is a
Right.
strange individual. It's possible.
And that is a big deal. That is a
Yes.
huge deal if somebody else comes out and says this,
Yes.
especially if the United States has what everyone suspects that it has, right? If
That's right.
China were to do that, would be an embarrassment.
That would be
Um,
catastrophic disclosure for the United States, because then immediately the president would have to come out and respond to that. And we would look like we were caught with our pants down. And it
yeah,
would create a huge crisis of confidence, I think, in the American people
I
that,
agree with that.
yeah,
And so,
they
yeah, I
wouldn't
think,
have the guts to tell us.
yeah, like you guys got
Yeah,
it. Like, yeah, it's almost like this has to get done because that's
exactly.
on the table. Birdie, this has been a really cool conversation. I
Yes,
wanted
it's
to
been
ask you
really
just,
fun, Matt.
yeah, I love going down these
Oh.
conversations. I wanted to ask you just one more open-ended question.
Yeah.
What significant insights can you share some insights you've gained from the nature of the UFOs in your remote viewing?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most interesting things to me is truly how pervasive this phenomenon is and how it's been a part of our entire human history. We have become a species under the UFO, quite literally. Our earliest recorded history has all of these encounters in our mythologies, many mythologies, even our religions, are all very similar in some ways. And these stories mimic alien encounters in some way. And so I think that whatever this phenomenon is, it's a part of us, deep part of us. And I can feel that every time I do a session, a remote viewing session on any of these particular species of beings, people, that there's this recognition. It's not just I recognize them, it's they recognize me, not me personally, but they recognize that we have a connection. So I think that what's happening in this whole phenomenon today, with this kind of global awakening to what's happening out there, discussions surrounding consciousness, I think that we're starting to understand what this connection is. It's a very tenuous understanding at the moment, but I think that understanding is going to grow, and we're going to find out that some of these people out there have been a part of our existence, maybe even responsible for our existence in many ways, maybe through genetic engineering or seeding the planet. There are a lot of ways that they could have been responsible for the human race. I think they are in some deep and important way. And I think that when we finally do get to the point where we have some kind of open contact, that we're going to understand why they've kept themselves behind the veil, hidden from us overall. People have sightings, but not everybody has sightings. But I think when we do have this open contact, it's going to be very apparent to us why we had to grow and morph and change ourselves to be able to have contact. I don't think we're not quite ready. We definitely weren't ready some time ago, but I think we're becoming more and more ready. I think evolutionary wise, we're becoming more ready. I think it just in terms of our just deep understanding about what's happening with our planet and with each other. And I think it's going to change everything. I think when we do have open contact, that we have a chance to have that kind of Star Trek reality where people no longer have to go hungry. We're not resource hoarding all of the time. That's where I really believe this is going, just from my sense of looking at all of these different kinds of individuals that exist in these strange states of being in these strange places. One of the most interesting projects I have ever done was a long project, and I did about 200 sessions on it. It's a lot of work. And this was on the
Say
alien
200
abduction.
sessions?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. I've done over, I don't know, way over 10,000 sessions. But so this is on the alien abduction phenomenon, because I was thinking, this was a few years back, I was thinking every time we look at it in remote viewing, we look at it like you would reading about it, like reading Whitley Strieber's book Communion or John Mack's research. You have this idea that these beings come down, they beam you up onto their ship, they do this medical probing, the anal probes and everything, maybe take some of your your reproductive genetic goo, and then they create these hybrid babies. I mean, that's the story, right? That's what
Mm.
these experiencers relay. And so we have developed this idea that the abduction phenomenon is a very negative thing, and that it's something that tells us that maybe these beings are not benevolent in some way. Maybe they have ulterior motives, even maybe they're trying to replace something that they lost. Maybe they're trying to take over the planet, like David Jacobs believed that,
Mhm.
yeah, they're going to take over. And so I started to think maybe we're looking at this from a human perspective, and maybe it's really something different going on. So I spent a long time working on this, and I had to mix it in with a lot of other stuff I was doing so that when I would work on these, I wouldn't know what I was working on. So it took me a few years to do this project. And at the end of it, what my project was looking at it, every single task was from the alien's perspective. So not from a human perspective. So I was looking at it through their eyes and through their understanding. And I realized that whatever's going on, it's not at all what we think. It's completely different. They have a completely different understanding and a different sense of who we are, who they are. It was revolutionary to me. It changed how I think about the entire phenomenon. It didn't feel negative to me at all. It felt like it was something they were compelled to do, something that was important for us, important for them. But it doesn't necessarily have to do with hybrid babies or genetics. It's something very different involving consciousness. It's a
Mm.
long, convoluted project, and I'm going to give a big lecture on it coming up in a couple of months and show all my work in this area because I think it's really important that we
It
start
sounds
looking at it from their point of view, not ours.
that sounds massively important because
Yeah,
like you just said, most people don't view it from a human perspective, right? And what could be more wildly more misunderstood than an interaction like that with something that's non-human, right?
exactly, exactly.
And so if you could shed some light on that, some perspective on that, I think that would be hugely important for people that have had experiences like that.
I
Um,
think so too. I've had my own experiences like that. So it was an important project for me. And you can think of a good analogy would be how we treat our pets. I have a dog. He's a nut. I love him. He's a couple years old. He's huge. He's 75 pounds. And
Whoa.
yeah. And when I got him, I rescued him from the shelter and he was awful. Oh my gosh, he was reactive. He hated
Mhm,
everybody and everything and was
mhm.
barking and trying to bite people. And I thought, oh, I've got to bring him back. What do I do? But I just was patient and I really worked hard with him. But from his perspective, he didn't like what I was doing. I'd put him in his crate. I'd tell him no. I'd have to restrict what he had access to. And so if you looked at it through his eyes, you'd think, wow, that lady's awful. At least at that point. And then now he's just a love bug. But it took a long time. And I think that it's like that. We are resisting something that is likely good for us. I think it's probably whatever this phenomenon is, the abduction phenomenon, it's likely very good for humanity. We're just misunderstanding it completely until we cross over the threshold and we become, you know, who we're meant to be. Like my dog has become now a nice dog like he's meant to be.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
I'll just add one more thing, and then we can wrap this up. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, if they really wanted to do bad,
Yeah.
they've demonstrated that they could.
That's
And s-
right. That's
and
right.
so,
Help us out.
why just do it to a few people here and there? It
Right.
doesn't make any
Right.
sense. So your estimation is probably pretty accurate. That whatever it is, it's probably gonna be okay, and it's probably for
Exactly.
our benefit.
Exactly.
So, Birdie, this was so cool. I'm so happy that we did this again.
Me too, Matt. Thank you so much for inviting me. I always love talking with you.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna come to the Scionics Summit #2. Can you tell people
Excellent.
how to find that, sign up for that, and what else you got going on?
Yeah, the Psionics Summit 2. And we're going to be talking about the ethics of communication with ETs. And
Very
we
cool.
have a great panel. I'll be on there. Chris Bledsoe, Richard Dolan, David Clements, and a number of others, some of which who were in the last program as well. It's on March 30th, not May, March 30th, and it's going to be at 11 a.m. Pacific time. So that would be 1 p.m. Eastern. And it's, oh no, 2 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, 2 PM.
11, 12, 1, 2 p.m. Eastern. And if you want to sign up, it's free over Zoom. It's a Zoom webinar, and you can go to Ubiquity University, and they have a link there. You can sign up for the Zoom and check it out, and you'll enjoy it. It's going to be a couple of hours, panel discussion. We're going to have a real dialogue this time, so it's going to be a little more give and take compared to the last presentation. And I'm expecting it to knock your socks off.
That's awesome. I'll put links to everything in the description.
Thank you.
Birdie, always a pleasure. Thanks so much,
Thanks,
everybody, for
Matt.
watching. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching the show. I hope you guys are enjoying the content. If you're finding any value, please hit that subscribe button, that like button, and leave a comment. It doesn't cost you anything, and it really helps out the show.